What's up guys, this is Army Crossover. I'm back with another episode of What If Naruto Was the Speed God Part 7. And if you did enjoy this video, consider a like, and if you're new to my channel and like my content, subscribe and hit that notification bell for more crossover fictions with a twist. Now let's begin this new video.
Chapter 16 Hellfire and Brimstone. Rio stood apart from everyone else, holding a glass, while they all celebrated Wally's birthday. Rio took a sip while glancing away from Zatanna, who hadn't spoken to her since the tragedy on Roanoke Island. Robin observed this and approached her after speaking with Zatanna. "You okay?" he inquired. "Peachy," Rio said hastily. "Why don't you just say you're sorry?" Robin questioned, returning his gaze to Zatanna. Rio remained mute as she took another sip. "Wally said you were crying after we got back to the cave, and about the talk you two had before the mission," Robin explained. Rio gave forth a sigh, and her goblet vanished. "New Year's Day," Rio explained calmly, "that's the day my speed sickness is going to kill me."
"How do you know that?" Robin inquired. "I did the math," Rio explained as she watched Zatanna chat with Artemis. "While I had originally made that plan with fate, I actually did grow to love Zatanna, but I stuck to the plan to make sure she didn't feel any pain in her heart when I was gone."
"You've got to tell her," Robin remarked. "No," Rio answered, staring at Robin, "to nod let Anataz. Think of it as a guarantee that you won't say anything." When the alarm went off, both of them looked around with the rest of the team.
"Attention, team," Batman announced over the intercom, "suit up. Polar stealth. Mission briefing in 5.
"Well, that's our cue," Rio replied as her suit wrapped around her. "After 5 minutes, where are Flash and Red Tornado?" Robin inquired. "They already have their assignments," Batman said on the holomonitor. "A massive ice storm has paralyzed North America from coast to coast. A hologram of a flying fortress appeared between them and the screen. Satellite imaging has spotted 5 flying ice fortresses, source unknown, that seem to be responsible and need to be stopped." "Can't the watchtower just blow them out of the sky or something?" Kid Flash wondered. "What's a watchtower?" Zatanna inquired. "I've got this one," Bruce, Moon Knight sighed. "The League's orbiting HQ isn't armed with weapons, which strikes me as a bit of an oversight. And with both Green Lanterns off-world, I need all hands on deck," Batman explained. Moon Knight halted after bringing up a clock on the inside of her helmet.
"Miss Martian, Artemis, Zatanna, and Moon Knight," Batman stated, recapturing Moon Knight's attention, "take the bioship and rendezvous with Green Arrow and Martian Manhunter at Ice Fortress No. 2.
Moon Knight and Zatanna exchanged fleeting glances before looking away. How long is this going to take?" Moon Knight inquired. "I've got to be at something in about an hour." "It shouldn't take much longer if we work quickly," Batman said. "I know it's important for you to be with that girl, but this is about saving millions of people." Moon Knight took a deep breath and dashed toward the bioship. Moon Knight climbed inside, grabbed a seat, and removed her mask off her face. She took out her phone and phoned a number before waiting. "Hello?" said Mina on the other end of the line. "Hey, Mina," Rio replied. "Something came up, and I'm going to be a little late to see you go into surgery, but I promise I'll be there when you wake up." "Okay, Naruto," Mina answered cheerfully on the other end. "I'll see you then." "See you then," Rio responded before hanging up the phone. Soon later, the other girls came, with Zatanna taking the seat next to Rio. As the ship set sail, I could feel the tension rising off the coasts of Rio and Zatanna.
"So, Rio, how have things been going with the Teen Titans?" Artemis inquired hesitantly.
"Pretty good," Rio replied, catching a glimpse of Zatanna out of the corner of her eye. "We were actually going to start searching for Beast Boy and the Blue Beetle from that photo my world's Flash left for us." Rio scowled at Zatanna as she whispered something under her breath. "Something you want to say?" Rio demanded fiercely. "I said you're probably going to end up taking their parents away from them," Zatanna chastised. Miss Martian flinched as Rio shattered a piece of her chair. "You just hurt the ship," she shouted at Rio. "She started it," Rio charged at Zatanna. "I started it," Zatanna exclaimed as her volume increased. "You're the one who started it by tricking my father into becoming Dr. Fate's host."
"Well, I certainly wasn't going to be stuck with helmet hair for the rest of my life," shouted Rio. "Besides, in case you forgot, if it hadn't been for me, you wouldn't have even had the chance to be a hero with the JLD."
"Enough." shouted Artemis, "You two need to just shut up and focus on this mission so you can get away from each other when it's over." Rio rose up, her mask covering her face, and made her way to the back of the ship. Moon Knight jumped out of the spacecraft, signaling Miss Martian to open it, and soared ahead toward the ice fortress, where Green Arrow and Martian Manhunter were. The fortress lasers began to shoot at Moon Knight, who flew around and blasted beams from her hands to destroy the AADs all over the place. Moon Knight kept an eye on the clock in the corner of her eyes while the fighting continued and noted that they only had roughly 20 minutes remaining. She gritted her teeth as a map appeared. "Everyone, get back," Moon Knight ordered as she touched down on the ice fortress. "I'm going to end this quickly." Her eyes burned like roaring flames as she yelled beneath her mast, her fists on the icy metal. The enormous heat emitted by Moon Knight caused cracks in the metal before flames erupted out of them. Moon Knight's costume began to heat up and she began to sweat as she yelled. "Temperature control is failing." Moon Knight yelled as her suit began to dissolve, as everyone else rushed into the bioship to escape the heat. "Rio, you have to stop," Miss Martian cried over the intercom, "you're going to blow the place up."
Moon Knight yelled harder as her suit melted away just as the ice fortress detonated. Rio's body rushed out of the explosion toward them, shocking everyone, including Zatanna. Miss Martian opened the bioship's roof and adjusted its density, allowing Rio to land safely within.
"Are you okay?" Green Arrow inquired as they all checked on her. Rio reached up and grabbed Miss Martian's throat. "Get us home now," she exclaimed, tired. The bioship returned to Happy Harbor and landed directly outside the hospital. Rio leapt out and ran up to Mina's level as soon as she could to find her mother in her father's arms. "What happened?" Rio wondered, panting. "How's Mina?" Mina's father remained mute and hugged his wife even more tightly. Rio looked at Crypto as he brushed up against her leg and moaned. Rio knelt on her knees and stared at the ground. A few hours later, "You all did good work," Batman stated to the members of Young Justice and Teen Titans, except Rio. "Not only did we manage to stop the ice fortresses, but Kid Flash managed to get the Heart to Seattle in time. Moon Knight B-99 has been identified." Everyone turned to see what appeared to be a furious Rio looking at them from the Zeta beam platform.
"What's the matter?" Starfire inquired. Rio moved slowly ahead, her gaze fixed on Batman as she passed through a seal, dressed in dark clothes and a black leather jacket with a chain wrapped around her shoulder.
"Does anyone recognize those clothes?" Cyborg inquired.
Rio's eyes lit on fire while her body started smoking. Her flesh and hair burned off as she roared while her skull lit on fire. Ghost Rider took her chain off her shoulder then threw the end at Batman, wrapping around his leg as he dove out of the way. Ghost Rider then pulled Batman to her then slammed the Dark Knight's head into the cave.
"Get off him!" screamed Superboy as he hurried over to dislodge Ghost Rider but was stopped by her superhuman strength. "Rio, come to a halt." "Stop!" screamed Calder. "Stop, you must let him go." As she witnessed Ghost Rider beat Batman to a bloody pulp, death covered her mouth in terror. "Rio, look at me," exclaimed Zatanna. "Stop, Rio, Rio. Stop, Naruto." Death exclaimed in a voice she didn't realize she was using. Everyone looked at her as she quickly covered her mouth, but what surprised them the most was that Ghost Rider had stopped attempting to kill Batman. She looked directly at Death and growled before walking toward her. A black smoke came out from behind Death and pushed Ghost Rider through the wall and out of Mount Justice. Death then went over to Batman and waved her hand over him, healing his wounds before disappearing. Ghost Rider was dumped to the sand of the coast's beach while Reaper rebuilt several yards away, and Ghost Rider stood up and scowled at Reaper. "Stay out of my way, Sasuke," Ghost Rider warned, her voice tinged with malice. "I knew I was right," Reaper remarked as he drew his shotguns. "You're exactly like Savitar." "I'm not like him," yelled Ghost Rider as she charged at Reaper. Reaper fired at Ghost Rider, who shrugged off the gunfire and socked Reaper in the face. Reaper went flying back before skidding to a halt as Ghost Rider hopped on a nearby motorcycle, transforming it as she did, and rode off. Reaper hurried after her in his smoke form before but lost sight as the rider vanished in the distance and the flames went out. Coughing up blood, Death struggled to move before Reaper punched her in the stomach, forcing her to vomit its contents. Lifting her shirt, she saw that the sigil from before had reappeared before she was grabbed by the back of the neck and thrown into a bookshelf by the Ghost Rider.
Looking up, Ghost Rider roared at the members of the Justice League Dark who were present, reaching behind her and swinging a flaming black scythe. Constantine ducked the flames while Etrigan grabbed Death to shield her from them and Swamp Thing raised a wall of trees to shield them. The Hellfire burned the trees to the ground and Constantine locked eyes with Ghost Rider.
I can see why you were so late to so many meetings, Constantine said to the rider. Stand aside, John, Ghost Rider said. No, Constantine stated emphatically. I really didn't want to have to do this, Ghost Rider explained as she clapped her gloved fists. Pulling her hands apart, Constantine noticed a small black sphere between Ghost Rider's hands and threw it out the broken window, causing the entire place to crack and break up as the sphere pulled everything into it. Constantine, Etrigan, and Swamp Thing vanished in a flash of light, as did Ghost Rider. Are you all right, Bruce? Wonder Woman inquired as Superman assisted Batman to his feet. I'm fine, Batman answered as a blazing chain wrapped around his waist and drew him into the arms of Ghost Rider. Staring into her eyes, Batman yelled in pain before being limply tossed aside. Ghost Rider looked at Superman and beckoned him to charge her. Doing so, Superman grabbed Ghost Rider and plowed through the ceiling of Mount Justice, soon leaving the atmosphere. Ghost Rider's flames went out and her body went limp. Letting go, Superman sighed at the life he just ended when a hand grabbed his.
Nice try, Ghost Rider observed as Superman began to feel weak.
Ghost Rider trudged along the bottom of the ocean and walked up out of it, wrapping her chain around the unconscious Man of Steel. Walking up Omaha Beach in France, Ghost Rider pulled Superman out of the tide before removing her chain and using it to create a portal that she walked through. She stopped to flick her wrist and Superman coughed up the water a little.
Gah, why won't that thing come off? Shouted Constantine as he was driven back for the 7th time by the enchantment of the sigil on Death's abdomen. It's a language that only the Endless are supposed to know, Death explained through her wounds. I've never even told Reaper about it because it's forbidden to reveal its existence to others who aren't Endless.
How strictly forbidden is it? Deadman inquired. There's nothing to worry about, Death remarked, it's more like an unspoken rule. There is no true consequence for the Endless telling other beings, and other beings are permitted to learn the language, but all records of its existence were deleted thousands of years ago. How did Rio find out? Inquired Blood. It's funny what you can understand when you're on the verge of insanity, a familiar voice murmured from the doorway. Spinning around, Constantine fired a magical beam towards a girl who resembled Rio but dodged at extraordinary speeds. OHY. Watch where you're firing that thing, exclaimed the girl as she stood back up.
How did you get in? Constantine inquired. I ran through the Speed Force and came all the way from Earth 9, the girl replied, as if they should have known. Earth 9. Deadman inquired. My name is Jessie Chambers, the girl remarked proudly as she posed, but you can call me Jessie Quick.
This news rendered everyone dumbfounded, as well as perplexed. What brings you here? As Jessie ran up to her, Death inquired. Well, I wanted to see what the multiverse was like and meet the person who helped my parents with Savitar, Jessie explained as she placed a hand on Death. For a brief instant, Death sparked with electricity as her wounds healed at breakneck speed. But this was clearly the wrong time to come back to, Jessie stated as she stepped back from the healing Death. What did you mean when you said you were insane? Jade inquired as she entered the room. I just heard about what occurred from Raven.
Did you know that some people had their most brilliant ideas when they were on the verge of going insane? It's not really that the person is going insane, Jessie said as she dashed over to a chair and propped her feet up on the table. It's just that their minds are racing too rapidly to comprehend what's going on. But, if the language belongs to the Endless, couldn't you or another Endless member remove that thing? Questioned Cheshire, looking at the Death symbol.
This was made using my attribute, Death stated as she shook her head, and since the Endless can only remove spells corresponding to their own attribute, the only person who could remove it is the one who cast it. So, we're basically screwed, Deadman stated as Death stood up.
Naruto isn't someone we should underestimate, she cautioned, and he'll probably try again with a better plan this time. Hope you enjoy your stay, a prison guard muttered as he shoved a brunette Rio into a cell at Belle Reve prison and slammed the door shut. And here I thought my last cellmate was cutting into my beauty sleep, Killer Frost muttered from the top bed. Dreaming of Dr. Stein, Crystal. Rio mocked, giving Killer Frost an arrogant smirk. I'd watch your mouth if I were you,
Killer Frost muttered as she descended from the top bunk. Rio's hand caught fire while grabbing Killer Frost's wrist, forcing the villain to recoil in surprise. I can get you out of here, Rio smiled. All I ask is that you help me exact my revenge on someone. What do you say? Is Batman going to be okay? Robin inquired as they examined the comatose hero laying on a bed.
He's just like you were when the penance stare was used on you, Black Canary explained. He's going to survive, but unless death fixes him, he'll stay like this. Zatanna turned and began walking down the hall. Where do you think you're going? Black Canary asked as she and Robin approached Zatanna.
To find Rio and put an end to this, Zatanna stated before Black Canary snatched her shoulder.
You're not going anywhere, Black Canary stated.
Like hell I'm not, Zatanna murmured as she drew her shoulder away. You're going to get yourself killed, Black Canary said.
And you're not my mother, shouted Zatanna in the face of Black Canary. You all are just idiots, Reaper exclaimed as he leaned against the wall, tired.
Where have you been? Robin inquired. Hell, Reaper continued to try to catch his breath. Seriously. I've been in hell. And I managed to grab this. A blue ball of flames appeared in his hand as he held it aloft.
What is that thing? Black Canary inquired. Is that what I think it is? Zatanna wondered.
A soul, Reaper replied, finally catching his breath, specifically, Naruto's soul. I literally had to fight Mephisto to get this, so I'm not going to be able to go there anytime soon.
So you intend to return it to its proper place, Robin concluded as he comprehended the plan. Exactly, Reaper affirmed. When a soul leaves the body and falls into the hands of a demon, the shell that remains becomes aggressive.
That would explain her recent outbursts, Black Canary speculated. That's not what caused him to snap yesterday, Reaper explained. That girl he was watching over, this Earth's Mina Dewan, passed away yesterday just as they were starting her surgery.
As Reaper walked approaching the entrance to the room where Batman was, the three's eyes widened with awareness.
After I finish healing him as best I can, we'll go after Naruto, Reaper remarked as he walked into the chamber to begin mending the Dark Knight.
That particular afternoon, Rio sat in the girls' section of the Bell Rev gym, with Killer Frost by her side. Rio stared directly at Jor Machant, aka Icicle Sr., through the glass.
So, when is your plan supposed to begin? Killer Frost inquired. Now, Rio murmured with a nasty grin. When the alarm went off, everyone glanced up.
Everyone back to their cells, the guards from above said.
Rio remained emotionless as everyone else moved towards the door.
Punch me, Rio murmured gently, expecting only Killer Frost to hear. Killer Frost said, what? Punch me right now, Rio replied, her voice urgent. Killer Frost followed orders and punched Rio in the jaw, knocking her to the ground. Rio stood up and threw Killer Frost to the ground. As Killer Frost and Rio continued their fist fight, the other female inmates gathered around and cheered taunted. Rio and Killer Frost were both stunned by their collars, causing them to stop as the sound of boots coming toward them reached everyone's ears. Everyone was moved aside from the two as the guards dragged them out of the room. Rio paused a second before slumping against the wall with a hand to her head as they finally managed to get to their feet and walk with the guards who had pulled them away.
Move it! Exclaimed one of the two soldiers accompanying her and Killer Frost.
Rio blasted a ball of fire at the man's face, causing him to scream in pain as Killer Frost shanked the other in the throat. Rio tore free her collar and grasped the guard's face, causing his entire body to burst into flames before disintegrating to ash. Killer Frost grabbed one of the guard's guns and the two rushed down the hall. The lone guard in the security room saw Rio and Killer Frost rush through the halls and went to press the alarm button, but he went limp since his throat had been slashed open. Scandal Savage emerged from the shadows, blood flowing from her gauntlet and a suitcase clutched in her palm. She opened it, set the timer inside for 30 seconds, and then returned the way she came. Rio and Killer Frost moved gingerly into a boiler chamber, with Killer Frost in command and Rio keeping an eye on the rear. Hearing something behind them, Killer Frost swung around as Rio fell to the ground, while Killer Frost shot the gun in the face of a guard. Rio tied a loose chain around her palm as they passed past the boiler room before she felt something. What's wrong? Killer Frost inquired as she approached Rio. Rio pushed the villain aside and tossed the suddenly fiery chain forward, severing another guard and turning him to ash. Rio reached out a hand and pulled Killer Frost back to her feet, dropping the chain. Sorry about that, Rio apologized before they both felt a strange sensation run over them, frying Killer Frost's collar in the process.
What was that? Killer Frost asked as Rio ripped off his collar. EMP, Rio said as she peered over her shoulder. You regained your abilities just in time. Split up and meet at the warden's office. The two parted ways just as numerous guards gained access to the boiler room.
Killer Frost moved cautiously across the boiler room, trying to dodge the guards when one she didn't see shot her in the shoulder. Killer Frost collapsed to the ground, clutching her shoulder as the guard closed in on her. Rio appeared quickly behind the guard and grabbed the back of his neck. The guard yelled in anguish as he was set on fire and burned to cinders. Rio looked around as he assisted Killer Frost once more.
On second thought, Rio continued as she picked up another loose chain. We should stick together because it'll take a while for your powers to return to full strength, and the other members of the team should be clearing out the guards and other prisoners.
Other members? Killer Frost inquired. Why do you think I came to Belle Reve willingly? Rio said as they made their way out of the boiler room. It was to recruit you for a special team. Welcome to the Secret Six, Crystal Frost. As a group of guards moved down the dimly lit corridor, a small child of perhaps 12 or 13 years old appeared as the lights flashed, moving closer and closer each time the lights went out.
As the lights flickered on and off, the girl suddenly dispatched the guards with ease. Outside, multiple police helicopters began to descend when a light flew between them, causing them to crash onto the ground. Secret landed on the roof and was phased into the prison. When multiple automobiles came barreling down the road, a bullet hole pierced each one's windshield, and they all drove off the road, exploding when they hit the ditches on each side. Targets neutralized, Deadshot said calmly as he stood up from his 2-mile-away position. Rio clasped her hands as she came to a halt near a doorway leading to the prison cells. What is it? Killer Frost inquired. Get to the roof, Rio said as she began down the corridor. I've got something I need to take care of. Rio walked inside the men's side of the cell block, pushing rioters and guards aside before stopping at an open cell. Jorma Kent, Rio remarked venomously, I thought you'd be out here. Fighting is for the young, Icicle Sr. questioned, reading from a book. Besides, with Belle Reve in chaos, it's only a matter of time before the Justice League arrives to bring order to things. 2 years ago in Happy Harbor, Rhode Island, Rio raged as Icicle Sr. looked up from his book. You were robbing a bank transport one night. During the ensuing chase, your freeze gun caused a car to flip. Icicle Sr. sat up slowly, trying to be interested in what Rio was saying. Inside that car, Rio tightened her hands, was a 6-year-old girl who was on her way home from a doctor's appointment for her heart condition but was paralyzed from the waist down. Yeah, I remember that, Icicle Sr. answered, and I also heard she survived. She died the other day from complications of her paralysis affecting her heart condition, Rio raged. That's first-degree murder. So, what? Icicle Sr. asked, getting in Rio's face. I was sentenced to life in prison, and I'm stuck here. It wasn't my plan to go after that transport.
It wasn't your plan, Rio inquired. Whose was it?
I don't know, Icicle Sr. answered after a time. We were contacted anonymously. If you really want to know, your quarrel isn't with me. Who does? Rio said a little more forcefully. Icicle Sr. was deafeningly silent before gazing at Rio. I don't know and never will, Icicle Sr. admitted, because every member of that crew was burned. No, Rio answered, shaking her head, not all of them. Icicle Sr. stepped away in dread as her eyes glowed. Easy, Icicle Sr. murmured as he backed up against the wall. You don't want to do this.
Yes, Rio answered as she nodded, I do. Her flesh burnt away as she roared, transforming into Ghost Rider. No, exclaimed Icicle Sr., shielding himself, no, no, no. A split second later, flames erupted from the cell, bringing everyone on both sides to a halt as the glass cracked. As Ghost Rider exited the flaming jail, everyone dashed into their cells and shut the doors behind him. Ghost Rider freed her chain as she made her way to the roof, and Killer Frost raised the gun she was carrying, but Deadshot persuaded her to lower it. As rescue workers and further law enforcement arrived, Ghost Rider used the chain to create a portal through which they all walked.
After 2 hours, Young Justice, Teen Titans, and Justice League Dark all watched as Icicle Sr.'s charred and burned body was hauled from the jail on a stretcher covered by a sheet. As one of the arms slipped out, Artemis dashed over to the railing and vomited over it. "He was supposed to die 10 years from," Death remarked as she leaned against the wall. "While he couldn't leave, he was supposed to be a gentle force that kept the peace here in his last year. I just don't understand how Rio could do this," Starfire exclaimed, trying to make sense of it all.
Something you want to tell us, young man? Blood of Robin inquired.
When Raven reached out to Robin, a chain appeared in her hand as she gripped her hand.
When did this happen? She inquired of the boy. Before we went off on that last mission, Robin said. I have to admit that this is a strong enchantment, Constantine said as he accepted the chain.
Zatanna murmured something beneath her breath, shattering the chain.
Rio's going to die on New Year's Day. Robin shouted as the chain cracked.
Everyone turned to gaze at Death, who shook her head. Naruto added to that sigil on him, so I don't know when he'll die, Death explained. Rio also said she went through with that fate deal so you wouldn't miss her, Robin said Zatanna.
What? Zatanna inquired. Naruto was always the type of person who prepared very far in advance for things, Death explained as she leaned against the railing. He once told me that he always comes up with over 1,000 different possibilities that could happen from a situation, which I thought was a joke at the time, but it appears that he was serious. As Death dropped her head, she pointed across the room to an empty cell. The Ghost Rider can tell when people die, Death lamented, and Crystal Frost is going to die soon. This is just a guess, but I think Naruto freed her to give her some closure. Got it? Cried Cyborg, looking at a holographic screen on his arm. Got what? Calder inquired. Rio had heavily encrypted her own server, and I've been trying to get in since she went all flaming skull on us, Cyborg explained as he accessed the data. It seems like she was making another team. Cyborg turned to face a wall and projected the data against it. Deadshot? Deadman inquired. Why him again? Shouldn't he be with the Suicide Squad? There are plans here for creating an extremely small EMP wave to disable microscopic electronics, Kid Flash explained. That must be how Deadshot is still alive. Hold on, Miss Martian replied. Flipping through another file, there's a file here on Deadshot's daughter. Why would Rio have that? Superboy inquired. Her birthday is today, Death explained, and Naruto probably got Deadshot to join by promising to help him see her today. Zatanna, there's a file about Greta Hayes here, Artemis said as Zatanna approached. This seal in the file, Zatanna began, looking at a chalk design, is supposed to drain the magical abilities of those who use it. Doing that to the girl will deprive her of her powers while also bringing her back to life, Death explained. Cassandra Cain, Robin read as the next file was brought up, the daughter of David Cain, a member of the League of Shadows, and Lady Shiva, a notorious hit woman with a strong martial arts background. It says here that Rio's teaching her how to talk. Swamp Thing inquired. Cassandra was born with the intent of raising her from birth to be a bodyguard for Ra's al Ghul, Death explained. Her father completely cut her off from the outside world and deprived her of speech and learning to read in favor of teaching her how to fight and ready the body language of others. That's horrible, Cheshire exclaimed. Naruto is probably teaching her everything her father didn't teach her, Death speculated as she twirled her hair sadly. But this one doesn't make any sense, Cyborg stated as he opened up the final file, Scandal Savage, the daughter of Vandal Savage. You've gotta be kidding me, Kid Flash exclaimed, Savage has a daughter. Vandal killed her lover, Death stated as a flask appeared in her palm and she drank from it. Naruto is likely helping her find a way to kill her father in exchange for her help. So, Rio is doing good deeds while being bad? Raven wondered. I don't think Rio is evil, Jessie stated as she emerged with Reaper. What do you mean? Calder inquired. Naruto is most likely in control of what he's doing, Reaper speculated. He hesitated and cast a sidelong glance. Is there something wrong? Inquired Cheshire. About 50 criminals died in the span of about 10 seconds, Reaper explained. What? Miss Martian asked, surprised. He's not wrong, Death replied as she took another gulp from the flask. While this thing may render me mortal and strip me of most of my powers, I can still sense death all over this universe. Death sighed and turned to face the group of heroes, willed the flask away.
There's one surefire way to get Naruto to come out of hiding, she said before turning to face Reaper. I'm sorry, Sasuke, but you're forbidden from interfering in this. Secret collapsed to the floor in a cold sweat, washing away the chalk drawing she was working on. Rio gave her a hefty bundle of cash and a cell phone before leaving with the others, looking up.
What did you just do? Killer Frost inquired as Rio created a portal that led to another location. I gave her back her life, Rio explained as they passed through the portal. Rio led everyone to a door as they were inside the hall of an apartment complex. Where are we now? Scandal inquired, irritably. Giving Crystal some closure, Rio explained as she rapped on a door.
The door opened to reveal a middle-aged guy who halted in amazement at the sight of Killer Frost, who was similarly shocked.
Dr. Martin Stein, Rio began as she pushed her way inside while keeping a strong grip on Killer Frost's wrist. I believe you and Crystal have some issues to talk about.
Why did you bring her here? Stein inquired as he stepped back from Crystal.
You don't have to worry about her killing you, Rio comforted as she went to the refrigerator to see what was inside. She's going to die soon anyway.
What are you talking about? Killer Frost asked, taking offense at the topic, as Scandal, Deadshot, and Cassandra stood by and observed.
You're a heat vampire, and that cell you were in was designed to keep heat out, Rio explained as she grabbed more beers and gave a can to Deadshot and Scandal. You're even taking heavy breaths right now and can barely stand, Rio added.
Killer Frost clenched her teeth, knowing Rio was telling the truth. She was currently exerting all of her might to stay upright while struggling to catch her breath. Before anyone could say anything else, the phone rang, and Dr. Stein hurried over to answer it. Hello? He questioned as he picked it up and turned to face Rio. It's for you. Rio took the phone from Dr. Stein and brought it up to her ear, raising an eyebrow. Yes? She inquired, warily. Naruto? Inquired an all-too-familiar voice, prompting Rio to hang up the phone.
Rio smashed the device with her foot, yanking the chain off her shoulder and using it to create a portal.
Make sure she doesn't kill the good doctor, Rio said as she walked through the door. Cassandra, stay. Everyone gazed at each other as the portal closed.
Ghost Rider arrived at a playground in Central City that looked exactly like the one she used to play at as a youngster and noticed a lone person standing there. She was about 23 years old, looked Indian, and had long black hair.
Naruto. Mina muttered as she turned to see Ghost Rider. Ghost Rider approached Mina with caution and cupped her cheek tenderly. Mina was transformed into death when Ghost Rider's hand wrapped around her throat.
Big mistake using that face, Ghost Rider exclaimed before being blown away by Cyborg's arm cannon.
Rio laughed as death faded away fast, leaving young Justice and the Teen Titans to prepare for battle. Clever, Rio said as she stood up, smiling, using my wife's face on an illusion to try and trick me. Very astute. Where's the rest of your new team? Calder inquired. Well, young Greta is back, Rio said, stretching her shoulder. Everyone else is busy making sure Crystal doesn't kill Dr. Stein. With a scowl on his face, Connor exclaimed, this ends now, Rio. Oh, my dear Connor, Rio exclaimed, raising her hand, did you think I wouldn't have prepared for this? The ground began to shake violently as something broke out of the ground behind her, as she snapped her fingers. Behind Rio, a gigantic robot around 8 feet tall with multiple bright red lines for eyes welding a massive sword sprang up from the ground. I'd like you all to greet Ascalon, Rio remarked, pointing at the players. Ascalon, those people are sinners who have defied God. Prepare for excommunication, Ascalon muttered as Rio yanked the chain off her shoulder and lit it on fire.
Ascalon charged and swung his sword, the tip of which scratched Artemis. Artemis, on the other hand, collapsed to the ground, howling in agony.
Artemis, said Kid Flash before tying a fiery chain around his neck and throwing him into a metal pole, knocking him unconscious. Rio swung the chain around the Teen Titans and tossed them into Calder, knocking them all to the ground. Meanwhile, Superboy charged Ascalon and punched him. But Ascalon remained uninjured before swatting Superboy away.
Rio then turned to face Miss Martian and Zatanna before being knocked back by a blur. Rio rose to her feet and took deep breaths as she and Jessie Quick locked gazes. Rio chuckled and snapped her fingers, causing Ascalon to break off his assault and turn his attention to Jessie Quick. Jessie sped around Ascalon before striking the robot with lightning. Before plummeting to the earth, Ascalon shook and emitted little sparks.
Very good, Rio said. Thank you, Jessie remarked with a smile. Mom taught me a lot. Well, she is my mother's doppelganger, Rio explained as she put her chain around her shoulder.
Is there really no way I could persuade you to stop all of this? Jessie wondered. Nope, Rio answered, continuing to smile. Very well, then, Jessie remarked as she accelerated forward.
Rio managed to dodge Jessie and tap her on the shoulder. Jessie slowed suddenly, fell, and flew into the monkey bars, smashing them. When a being loses their connection to the speed force, they can generate a polarized charge that can negate the speed of a speedster temporarily. Rio explained as she approached the injured Jessie and knelt in front of her. You can only do it once, and it only works on those who don't share DNA. But we're doppelgangers, Jessie grumbled in pain. We may be doppelgangers, but we don't share the same DNA, Rio stated as she rose up, and you weren't born with speed sickness. I was. Rio clapped her hands and Ascalon vanished in a flash of light, returning her attention to Zatanna and Miss Martian. I really didn't want to have to do this to you too, Rio explained, reaching for her chain. Then do it with me, Death remarked as she arrived several yards away with Reaper. Everyone who was still awake glanced toward Death as she approached Rio holding a glass bottle.
I didn't think you'd actually come, Rio commented as she and Death circled each other.
Wherever there's death, I'm there to collect their souls, Death stated as she tossed the bottle to Rio. Rio caught it and gazed inside at the blue wisp before turning to face Reaper. Do you really think this will make me stop? Rio inquired. It's part of who you are, Death added as Rio opened the bottle.
Rio's body got a light blue aura after drinking her soul before it faded. Rio then yanked the chain from her shoulder and lit it on fire. You took my parents' lives, Rio raged, and you took my grandfather's life. You murdered my wife.
Rio's flesh and hair burned, leaving her as Ghost Rider. It's about time you lost someone important to you, Ghost Rider replied, swinging the chain away from everyone. This perplexed everyone as to why she did this before wrapping the chain around Destruction, who became visible and yelled in pain as the chain wrapped around him. Ghost Rider yanked on the chain, yanking Destruction into her grasp.
Brother! Shouted Death as Reaper approached. Ascalon reappeared, swinging his sword and pushing Reaper away. Ghost Rider drew Destruction close and muttered something to him before slicing him through. Time seemed to slow as Destruction slid off the blade and dropped to the earth. As Rio peered down at the dying Endless, it began to rain. Brother! Death shouted as she dashed to Destruction's side. Destruction stretched up to his sister with a blood-splattered hand, just touching it before it dropped back to the earth, lifeless. Death cradled her brother's body as Ghost Rider returned to Rio, leaving everyone speechless at what they had witnessed. Rio gave Death a detached look of sadness as the rain fell. Death isn't something you can just go around handing out, Rio explained, but the power of life can never be handed out to people unless they understand the burden it carries. You've seen how death affects individuals around you, but you've never personally experienced it. Even after Dream died, you had no bond to him. But you did it with the brother you dumped. Those years we spent together must have meant something. You knew? Death asked, shockingly looking at Rio. Since Savitar returned the first time, Rio stated as she sat down next to Death, when I first encountered Sasuke on this earth, I could feel something familiar about him but I didn't know what it was until I saw you. Naruto, I'm so sorry for what I did, Death said, cradling Destruction's head. Rio transformed the body of the dead Endless to ashes with her finger before hugging the grieving Death. What I did to you yesterday was to teach you a lesson about your abilities for leaving me and the kids that I'll never see again, Rio explained as she withdrew the sigil from Death's abdomen. Life is not something that should be taken lightly. You already know what occurred to me as a result of that. Rio stepped back and used her chain to create a gateway through which Ascalon passed. Where do you think you're going? Starfire asked as she attempted to take a combat stance. A funeral or two, Rio replied, pulling a sigil from her body and letting it fade into the air. Bruce will be back to normal tomorrow morning. Rio stepped into the portal, tears streaming down her cheeks, before turning to Zatanna as the gate closed behind her. Rio approached Dr. Stein's living room and discovered Killer Frost on the couch, looking distressed. She got worse after you left, Dr. Stein remarked as Rio sat down next to her on the coffee table. I'm sorry I didn't get you out sooner, Rio admitted. I could have saved you before then.
It's not your fault, Killer Frost said as she aged quickly. It would have happened to me even if you hadn't saved me. Then, at the very least, let me put you out of your misery, Rio replied, placing a hand over Killer Frost's, no, Crystal Frost's eyes as she sobbed. Martin, Crystal began to cry gently, I love you. As everyone bent their heads, the girl converted Crystal's body to ash as death left with a light blue wisp in her fingers and a sorry smile at Rio. The following day, Rio appeared at Happy Harbor Cemetery dressed as Ghost Rider but not as said hero and moved up to the crowd.
Rio hugged the parents of the person whose funeral was being held today before placing a single blue rose on the closed casket and taking a seat in the back. Rio looked up as the service began and saw Death standing there with the little Mina on her shoulder. Mina waved at Rio as the two faded away. After the coffin was lowered, Rio and several others stood up and began shoveling soil into the hole. After that, everyone started leaving except Rio, who lingered there staring at the gravestone.
Rio's hand was gently held, and she looked around to see Zatanna and the other Young Justice members, as well as the Teen Titans and Justice League Dark. Rio yanked her hand away and rode off down the road, while Swamp Thing tended to the grave of Mina Dewan with grass and flowers. Rio's motorcycle's wheels were wrapped in blue flames as she accelerated down the road. Rio's flesh began to burn off as she left the city, transforming her into the Ghost Rider, but with blue flames. Alright, Caitlin Snow remarked as she took off her hood as she entered the cabin, let's get everything set up. Scandal Savage threw a peek at her before lifting up a corner of her jacket's collar as she went about assisting several of the scientists unload some crates. Target identified, she said quietly before continuing to unpack the equipment. To be continued.
That's it for this part, guys. Thanks for listening to this video. If you did enjoy this part of the story, like, share and subscribe for more, and thank you all for having support and have a great day.